Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a Glacial Geek Deep Thoughts Thin Coats. This is going to be my sit and paint show where I paint models and discuss my ideas and thoughts on Warhammer and where I want to see things going or anything else that really comes to mind. Today I'm going to be talking to you about my thoughts on competitive play versus fluffy play and where I think both of those fit into the world and the hobby that it is that we do. My main thought on that is that between that, the one thing that I think our hobby has over really honestly anything else, any other real hobby that there is out there, is that our hobby allows for both competitive and for fluffy fun play. And I think that if you're not doing either, you're really selling yourself short. Because the fact is that we are playing a system that has had its fluff developed for the past 30 years to such an extent that it's created an entire world that is beyond and different from our own. And it gives us the opportunity to escape from the reality, so there are no political issues that we actually have to suffer through. There are no actual dealings with life that we have to suffer through. The only thing we have to suffer through is a course of bad luck with our dice. So if you don't go into this with a thought to the fluffy nature, you're really selling yourself short on the entirety of this game. I think that when I put down my models onto the table, I'm not just putting little chunks of plastic onto the table. I guess literally I am, but that's not what I'm thinking when I'm putting them on there. What I'm thinking of when I'm putting them on there is that I'm deploying my forces. These are the warriors from the 41st millennium here to come and save humanity or destroy humanity, depending upon what army I'm playing. And the idea behind it is that I'm transporting myself really into the 41st millennium, a time that I will probably never see. I only say probably because you never know. And whether I'm playing a fluffy game where I'm driving a narrative that I've developed between me and my friend, or whether I'm playing in a tournament, that's kind of what I'm thinking when I'm putting them on the table. And that's why I like playing with painted models. It helps to set me into that mindset and puts me into that mindset. And it also lets me kind of escape reality every once in a while. You know, I don't think there's anyone really that wants to be so heavily put into their own reality that they don't need a break every once in a while. You know, are there bills to pay? Is your boss being a jerk? Is your family giving you trouble? Whatever it is, you can escape that for however long it is that you're going to be playing a game. You know, whether it's for the half hour you're going to be playing a kill team game, or whether it's, you know, the 12 hours you're going to be playing an APOC game. It gives you a chance to escape reality. And it gives you a chance to go beyond who you are into something bigger and different. And if you're not taking advantage of that, you're kind of missing a whole portion of what it is that makes our game different than a game of Monopoly. On the other hand, I think that if you don't try to consider the competitive nature of this game, you're also selling yourself short. I think that the reality is that we as human beings are competitive beings. We like to compete. We like to win. That's why even the simplest games of rock, paper, scissors, someone wins. Tic-tac-toe, someone wins. We don't really play games where nobody wins. There's winning and losing for a reason. Humanity likes to have winners and have losers. And we always, when we play games, strive to win. And I think that our hobby, uniquely to a lot of other just as purely creative endeavors, such as just model making, allows us to engage on this level, in this competitive nature. It allows us to go head to head with an opponent and see who can drive their army better, who can tactically make decisions to capture the objectives and move their pieces around the table to better achieve what it is necessary to win. So whether that's killing someone or taking objectives on places on the board, this game allows for a high level of competitiveness. Even if you're just playing with your friends, even if it's just for fun, there's still that aspect of competitiveness where you want to beat your opponent. If you're going into it not wanting to beat your opponent, that's not really what the game itself and the mechanics are for. So I feel like to fully experience what this game and what this game has and holds, you kind of have to explore both aspects of this, both avenues of this, and allow yourself to try to beat your opponent and also have fun transporting yourself into the 41st millennium. When I go into a game with a friend on the weekend or whenever, after work, whenever it is, and we're just playing for fun, I don't make lists that are designed to just trounce him. But I also don't make lists that I think are just going to roll over and die really quick. Because the reality is no one wants to play a game that just rolls over and dies. Nobody wants to destroy their opponent in a friendly game. There's no fun in that because you're both going to be sitting there for however long. You've had to drive to the store or drive to your friend's house, however it is, set up a table, set up your models, go over the rules and parameters, and then start playing and rolling. No game is going to go real quick. And if you're not in it after turn one, that's not a whole lot of fun. So I make my armies in a way that I think is going to be competitive, but still have a game and still have fun so that we can both be there and competing throughout it. But when I go into a competitive situation, like a tournament at my local gaming store or wherever else, the idea behind it is that I do want to win. And in that case, the reality is the fun is going to be coming in spending the day facing my army off against someone else's army and see who can if I can trounce my opponents for the day, whoever they might be based upon however the pairings come up during the game. So when that comes into it, yeah, I try to make the hardest, toughest list that I can possibly think of. But I don't necessarily only make an army that I think is going to trounce. I make an army that I find fun to play. So, for instance, I have not made a Ynnari army. I know they're going to be pretty tough, and I think they're going to be pretty strong in the meta of the competitive scene, but I'm not interested in Eldar. That's not where my interests in gaming and modeling lie. My interests lie in my Space Marines. My interests lie in my Gene Stealer cults, because I find the stories of them much more engaging. I find the aesthetic of them much more engaging. That's just the way I feel with those. So, when I go and I make an army, I choose from those armies because they're the ones that I want to play. They're the ones that I want to build. So, with that in mind, though, I do look for the strongest combination of units that I can possibly come up with. So, whether that happens to be, in my case currently, I'm running a combination of Skyhammer with Ultramarine Tactics, and I'm running a Ravenwing Strike Force and an Assassin. This is why I'm painting these guys up, so I have some options in tweaking my list even more. So the point behind that is that I have found a combination that works for me, that works really well in a competitive scene. It can handle all of the storm surges that my opponent wants to throw my way. It can handle Ynnari and Eldar jet bikes shooting all over the place. A Wraith Knight dropped in front of me. My army can handle all of these. I had the latest tournament that I played in. I played my first match against Blood Angels, and he brought a formation that comes with 3 Storm Ravens that all can start entering turn 1. And it comes with drop pods he also came with drop pods with 3 Dreadnoughts, the Chapter Ancients formation. It's a really brutal combination, and it's a pretty hard counter to my list because I don't have anything in my list that can handle flyers. I don't have anything in my list. I do have some stuff in my list that can handle dreadnoughts, but the flyers especially really gave me trouble. And he could null deploy just like me, which took away a lot of the advantage of what my list does. My list can respond to people, and if he's not on the board for me to respond to, then I'm left with a situation where I can't do anything. And even with that, I managed to come out of it with a tie after some good maneuvering on my part and some lucky dice rolls. But the point is that I created a list that even when it went up against a hard counter to my own list, still managed to hold its own, was able to eke out a draw in the end with it, which, in that circumstance, I felt was a pretty good result, considering I was run up against, like I said, what I felt was a pretty hard counter to my list. So, yeah, I make a list that I think can perform really well. That's what I want it to do. I want it to be able to go into a situation and just start kicking butt, because that's what tournaments are for. You know, I can have fun with my friends. Most of the people that I play against in these tournaments are my friends, and if they aren't my friends, by the end of it, they are my friends, because I go into it with a good attitude. I don't go into it bragging. I don't go into it trying to demoralize them and win the game of minds. I go into it with a list that I feel is strong. I go into it with the expectation that I can possibly win, and sometimes I do. And that's what competitive is about. You know, I think I hate when I see people posting and saying, oh, I'll never play Eldar, I refuse to play Eldar. If someone dropped that list on the table, I would sweep up my models and I'd go home. Because why? What's the point of only playing a game that's not going to be difficult? What's the point of playing a game that's not going to be driving you to get any better? When I run up against a list that just beats me mercilessly, I try to figure out why. I look at it and I go, how did they manage to just trounce me here? And I decide from that point on to try to figure out what I could do better with my own list, what I could do better with my tactics, and improve so that the next time I can win. The first time I brought a Skyhammer list to a tournament, it didn't do spectacularly, because I had that first alpha strike, but then after that, I was really wanting and hurting. And I had a lot of the rest of my army on the table, so if my opponent was going first, they were going to be able to kind of run all over whatever I had on the table and wipe out a lot of the stuff I had without the support of the rest of my army. So I went back to the drawing board, and I looked at what I had. I looked at the forces that I had. I looked at the models that I had and the armies that I liked to play. And I really felt strongly that I could do something with the Skyhammer. And, you know, I know it's a strong option, and a lot of people run it, but that for a reason, because it's a strong option with a lot of opportunities for being really cool and super awesome. So I went back to the drawing board and I said, all right, with this in mind, what can I do? And I was looking at it. And I had been running 5-man Devastator squads in the drop pods that would drop down with 4 grav cannons. So they would drop down and they would point at whatever model and it would be deleted. But they could only shoot at 1 unit each. So at most I was destroying 2 units if I was lucky with my dice. So I thought, well, how can I better make an opportunity of this? Well, 4 grav cannons are very often way overkill for killing something. Maybe something huge like a brass scorpion, or maybe something like a wraith knight, you might need 4 grav cannons. But sometimes, if you luck out, you don't. And if I run into Tau with a bunch of riptides, honestly, 2 grav cannons is going to handle it. So I put the math together and I said, well, if I bring a 10-man Devastator squad in these, I can send them into combat squads and put 2 grav cannons into each of those squads. And what that would allow me to do then is I could point them at different targets if I so desire. So if I run into someone with a whole bunch of smaller units, they don't have to waste 4 grav cannons killing 1 squad. They can point them at 2 different squads and hopefully delete 2 squads. Because, like I said, 2 grav cannons often is enough to kill an entire squad. So, but they're close enough to each other at that point, because they're both coming out of a drop pod, that if they need some support, if they need some help, they can get it, because they can go out there and they can point at the same unit if they so desire. So if there's that Wraith Knight that just won't go down because he's making all his saves, then I can just point him at someone else. I can point them together, and then 2 squads will be able to take him down. But I have more flexibility with it. So suddenly my flexibility was increased by doing that one change. Cool. That sounds great. Now I went back and I was looking at it, and I started to run a Ravenwing Strike. I decided I wanted to run a Ravenwing Strike Force. I was like, oh man, I want to run my Flyer, because I thought my Flyer would be really good with the ability of its blast possibly turn into Vortex. So I put together a Ravenwing Strike Force list, and I put it onto the table, and I ran it. When I got there, I realized, I've got the Flyer in my Ravenwing Strike Force, so they have to start off the board and come in turn 2. I didn't plan on doing null deploy. I was forced to do null deploy at that point, because I had Skyhammer and Ravenwing Strike Force with a Flyer in it. And I ended up winning that tournament. And the null deploy played a big part in it, because a lot of lists had a hard time figuring out how to deploy effectively on the table while still not holding themselves vulnerable to the Skyhammer Alpha Strike, and then outflanking bikes. So I realized it was pretty effective, but my flyer wasn't effective. He didn't do much. He came on turn 2, maybe shot at something, but then would have to drop into hover mode and then became a big target and an expensive target, you know? So with that in mind, I said, going back to the drawing board again, I was like, well, I like the way this worked. I liked the null deploy, but I didn't like the flyer. So I decided to make a list with my Ravenwing Strike Force that didn't have a flyer. But the option for starting in reserves and coming in turn 2 is still there, regardless of whether you have a flyer or not. That's not the only option in choosing that. So I went back and made the change, and I put a whole bunch of bikes in there. And I ran that list and ended up winning a tournament with that list. It went undefeated, tied for first because me and someone else had tied, and we couldn't play a fourth game because it was going late night to get something back at home. But we ended up tying for first with that list, and I was like, that's a really strong list. Then I started to see some of the meta. People were bringing out Magnus and a whole lot of Psychers, and my thoughts were, I don't know if I have the tools available to take down a really heavy Psyker list, because I had one Psyker, level 2 Psyker in there, or level 1 Psyker in my list, but it wasn't doing anything really for me, and it very easily could get out-psyched. And so I decided that what I was going to do was just get rid of that Psyker. But I wanted to have something I could combat with, so I added in the Calexis as a counter to a heavy Psyker list. So it worked. It worked well. I ended up that's the tournament that I played it with. That first game that I had against like the hard counter to myself, I ended up tying that game. But then I won the next 2 games. One against a super heavy Psyker list with a Lord of Change and a whole bunch of Thousand Suns and a bunch of Zangors and a bunch of Pink Horrors and things like that. It was a really brutal list, but I was able to hold my own because of moving in the Calexis from outflanking it during reserves and everything else that my list did well. So basically what I'm getting at here is I went into it trying to win. And you could call me a WAAC player because I was making my list to win. That was the intent of my list, was to win. It wasn't intended to just have a fun time. It was intended to win. And that's what I do at a tournament. I try to win. So it was a pretty WAAC list. It's a hard list. It's a really tough list for a lot of other lists to handle. But that's what tournaments are about. And at the end of the day, I'm still friends with all the people that I beat. Because it was fun to be able to do. It was fun to be able to compete with each other like that. And we could go off the next day and have fun just playing a softer list. So I actually ended up playing the list that tied me. My friend, I ended up playing with that against that list in a battle report, and we just had a blast. You know, I made a different list. It was one that had more counters to what he brought, so it became a closer battle, and it was a super close battle because of it. And we had a blast. At the end of that game, we shook hands and had a fun time. We were laughing and had a great time. So he brought a list that was supposed to be winning at all costs. So I brought a list that was meant to give that list a tough match. And we had a great time. We had fluffy reasons behind what was going on. We had a narrative that we put through it and had a great time. So we were doing competitive because we were both trying to win, and we were having fluffy because we had a narrative going on with it. That was a lot of fun. And the reality is, that's the beauty. That's what our hobby does that a lot of other hobbies don't. It allows you to do both of those. It allows you to be a fluff bunny and a WAAC player at the same time. And I feel like if you discount one, if you only take one of those and not and don't try both of them, you're really underselling what the hobby has to offer. You know, our hobby is a multifaceted hobby. We have the actual hobby aspect of it, the building of the models, the modding of the models, the painting of the models to make gorgeous things. And we have the collective side of it, trying to build up a force, buying new units, thinking in our heads about assembling an entire force, whether you're building an entire an entire company of Space Marines, or whether you're trying to develop an entire small craft world of Eldar, you can go through the whole collecting method of figuring out what it is you want to buy, going out and buying it, and then adding it to your force. It's a lot of fun being able to do that. But then there's a game aspect of this. So we go out and we're able to take these armies that we've spent so much time collecting and building and painting, and we get to test our mettle against someone else who's been doing the same thing with their army. So we get to go out and we get to fight against their army and put it out on a table and spend a couple hours beating each other until someone comes out victorious, or you just come out with a tie. But we competed against someone. So our hobby allows us to have that aspect of competition that we as humans innately are drawn to. So whether we're playing cards, or whether we're playing Monopoly, or whether we're playing Magic, or whether we're playing rock, paper, scissors, we have that competitive aspect of who we are that can come out in our hobby. And beyond that, in something that a lot of other games don't have, we have a very rich and developed narrative that goes on with our hobby. We've had 30 years of publications from Games Workshop talking about the backstory, talking about characters, talking about the wars that have been fought in the far, far distant future. And then we've had entire novels put together for wars that happened in the not quite as distant future, but still really far distant future from where we are with 30K, with the Horus Heresy. And our hobby allows us to tap into all of that and create our own narrative, forge our own path, and tell why our specific army is fighting off against this other army. Why are my Space Marines, why are my Dark Angels butting heads against this Tyranid force that's come out that my friend brought along? In the specific narrative of 40K in the novels, Dark Angels aren't necessarily Tyranid hunters. That's usually left to the Ultramarines or to the Death Watch, But because we're fighting off against each other in just the competitive aspect, we can bring whatever army it is that we want to bring. So then we forge a narrative. All right, my Dark Angels happen to be on this planet because it's a recruiting planet for them, and the Tyranids happen to come into the system, and the Dark Angels are trying to hold it off to try to defend this recruitment planet for them, because they don't want to give it up. It's brought forth many a good battle brother, and giving up on that is not an option for the Dark Angels. Boom, we have a narrative that goes along with it. So suddenly my little model that's down on the table is no longer just a piece of plastic. He's a battle brother fighting for the very future of his chapter, trying to hold off this alien, this Xenos force, to protect this planet, so that in the future, thousands of years from where after he will die, that the chapter will be able to recruit from this planet and bring forth another battle brother who might someday go on to become a legend. That's what's going on in my head when I place those guys on the table. It's not just Tactical Marine number 12 is going to shoot his strength 4 bolter against your toughness 3 Termagant. That's the reality and the mechanics of what I'm rolling the dice for, but that's not what's going in my head when I'm placing them there. So I feel my thoughts, to conclude on all of this, my thoughts on how this hobby is different from everything else is the fact that we can have all those different aspects in one. We have something that we can collect. So all of those blind booster boxes that you can get in other hobbies, all of the various collectibles that there are, busts of superheroes. We get the collection aspect of it. So we can go out and buy the newest and greatest models that have come out for our armies, or we can start a whole new army. We can go out and we can collect and build and gather stuff, because a lot of what geeks like to do is gather stuff, and I think that's awesome, and I love things that allow me to do so, and our hobby is very good at doing that. That's why Games Workshop does as well as it does. We also have the competitive aspect of this, or we have the hobby aspect of this game, because once we buy them, we can build them, We can mod them, we can kit bash them, change out heads, change out arms. We can use green stuff to change poses, to change aspects, to build a different looking model so they're not all the same. We have the fact that we can then paint them however we want. If I want my Dark Angels to be riding green bikes, they can ride green bikes because that's my choice. These are my models. This is my army. I'm going to do what I want. And there's nothing that anyone can say about it. And there's nothing that anyone really usually will say about it. They might ask you why, but that's it. Everyone agrees that it's your army. You do what you want with it. So we have that hobby aspect of it. So as opposed to just building models and painting them to then go on the shelves, we can do that with our hobby. But then we have the other aspect of our game, which is the fact that it is a game. So just like all of the board games that I play with my friends, the Euros, the worker placement games, any of those games, the Twilight Imperium games, the Risk, anything, we have an actual game with mechanics and objectives and dice rolling and thought process and tactical considerations that go into it. We have a game, which is a lot of fun, and it also impacts a great deal of different portions of the geek world. Whether you're a board gamer, a video gamer, we like to game. It's what we do. We do a lot of gaming, and this hobby, this Warhammer 40,000, allows us to game, allows us to play each other. And beyond just playing, this game also allows us to be very competitive. So while I will probably never become a super competitive basketball player, I can become a super competitive Warhammer 40,000 player. Because I can put the time and effort into this, and I don't have to have the natural physical abilities of an athlete. But I can still compete on a high level. So if I want to go to the LVO, or if I want to go to Adepticon, or if I want to go to the Nova Open, or if I want to go to a Warhammer Day, I can. I can go to these grand tournaments and I can face off against hundreds of other people and try to show that I'm better than them. And I don't need to be born with any kind of special talent. I don't need to have really strong muscles. I don't need to have really fast reflexes. I've just got to show up with my army and I can compete. And I think that's amazing because it is a part of who we are as human beings that we compete. We try to be better. We try to do better, And competing doesn't mean that we have to hate each other. And doesn't mean we have to put other people down. It just means that we can strive to be our best and we can strive to win. And I think that's an aspect of our hobby that a lot of other hobbies don't have, or a lot of other hobbies only have. When you play Magic the Gathering, that's huge. They've got the competitive aspect of that down to a science. But you're not building cards, you're not painting cards, you're not doing anything of that, so it doesn't have the hobby aspect. It's got the collecting aspect, but it doesn't have the hobby aspect. It has the competitive aspect, and I guess now it does even have some of the narrative aspect, but it's still missing that hobby aspect. If you've got board games, it's got the collecting aspect. You can have a huge collection of board games. I have friends who have massive collections of board games that are a lot of fun to play. They've got the competitive aspect where you can go in and you can try to beat each other at the game and see who's better at it. The tactical thought, the gameplay aspect. But it doesn't have the hobby aspect. You can paint the miniatures, I guess, that come with it. But, you can't really customize a board game as much as you can customize an army of Space Marines. If I don't like the way that missile launchers look, I don't have to play missile launchers. If I don't like the way that bikes look, I don't have to play bikes. But if I do, I can. If I'm in a board game, I don't really have much choice. I'm left with whatever came with that. So, in the end, what I think our hobby is that it collects a lot of the aspects that make being a geek awesome and combines it into one pursuit. And I think when you start to discount a lot of the other pursuits, the other aspects of this hobby, and if you start to look down on certain aspects of the hobby, you lose a lot of what makes 40K what it is. You lose a lot of what makes 40K great, in my opinion. Because you start to discount aspects that 40K has that others don't. So if all you're interested in is competing, why not just do Magic? It's a lot easier to carry a deck of cards than it is to carry an entire case of miniatures. So if you have no interest in the lore, if you have no interest in the hobby aspect, I don't know why you would choose 40K over a game of Magic. And if all you want to do is just have narrative, fluffy thoughts about it, and you don't really care about competing with the miniatures that you buy and you purchase and you build, then I don't know why you wouldn't just go read a comic book, or write a comic book. I don't know why you wouldn't just go and write fan fiction about your favorite genre, or watch a Doctor Who or something like that. Because the reality is, what makes 40K as awesome as it is that it combines all of those different aspects of geek into one cohesive pursuit. So I can collect, I can hobby, I can narratively think about and drive, and I can competitively work with my army. So those are my thoughts. If you have any other thoughts on the issue, please share it below and let me know if you think I'm right, if you think I'm wrong, if you agree with me. If there are aspects you agree with, there are aspects that you disagree with, let me know below, and hopefully we can continue the conversation. So I hope you guys have all enjoyed it. This has been the very first Deep Thoughts and Thin Coats here with the Glacial Geek. And until next time, have fun.